He brought his most powerful drawing to class. She tore it up right in front of everyone. Called it violent. Called him a problem, but what she didn't know, someone caught it all. And that trash drawing, it's now hanging in a museum, for the whole world to see. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun filtered through cracked blinds, casting thin golden lines across the chipped linoleum floor of the Palmer apartment. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, peeling wallpaper, and a living room that smelled faintly of lavender and acrylic paint. But to Zion Palmer, it was home. More importantly, it was his sanctuary. At 13, Zion had already lived through more than most kids twice his age. His father, a warehouse worker, had vanished when he was 6, left for a job in Detroit, and never came back. His mother, Olivia, once an accomplished high school art teacher, now worked the grill at Billy's Diner 6 days a week. Her hands, once so graceful with a paintbrush, were now rough from dish soap and fry baskets. Still, she never let Zion see her break. She just pushed his sketchbooks toward him each night and said, "Draw what they won't let you say." And Zion did. Every page was a protest. Every pencil stroke, a memory. He drew what he saw and what no one else wanted to admit. The face of the cashier who always followed his mother around the corner store. The way the neighbor's son flinched whenever police sirens passed. And one night, after watching his older cousin get handcuffed at a block party for looking suspicious, Zion created the image that would change everything. He titled it Breathe. It was raw. Charcoal lines formed a black man pressed to the pavement, one arm outstretched, fingers splayed in desperate tension. A police officer's knee pinned his back, a blue uniform looming large, faceless. Around them people watched, some crying, some frozen, one holding up a phone. The man's eyes were wide, lips slightly parted as if gasping. Zion had never shown anyone something so personal. He brought it to school the next morning, tucked between loose-leaf paper and a half-finished math worksheet. Langston Middle School, nestled on the edge of their town, looked the same as always. Beige bricks, a flag out front, and a staff that smiled too wide when talking to white students, but hardly glanced at kids like Zion. Still, art class had always been his escape, until Miss Vale. Gretchen Vale was in her late 40s, pale and pinched, with short cropped blonde hair and eyes like frostbite. She'd come from a private academy upstate, and always made a point of reminding students what real art looked like. Her favorites were watercolor still lifes, and Monet-inspired landscapes. She barely glanced at anything abstract, especially not Zion's sketches. When he'd shown her a piece called Cornered, depicting a young black boy facing 2 looming officers, she'd scoffed and said, "Maybe try drawing something hopeful for once." Still that day, Zion brought Breathe. He waited until class was quiet. Students hunched over still life assignments of fruit bowls and plastic flowers. Slowly, he walked to the front, hands shaking slightly. "Miss Vale," he said, holding out the drawing. "I worked on this at home." She took it without looking up, nodding absent-mindedly as she reached for her red pen. Then her eyes landed on the image. Silence. The room fell still. Even the click of pencils stopped as students sensed the tension. Mrs. Vale's lips tightened. "What is this?" she asked sharply. Zion hesitated. "It's called Breathe. It's about something I saw. It's how I felt." She studied the sketch again, her face contorting. "This is violent, completely inappropriate for school." Her voice was rising now. "We don't showcase this kind of imagery in this classroom. This isn't art, it's agenda." Zion blinked. "But it's my truth." Without warning, Miss Vale held the drawing at arm's length, and in one sudden, precise motion, ripped it straight down the middle. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a pencil. Zion's throat tightened, his heart pounding. The sound of the tearing paper echoed louder than the intercom. Miss Vale's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the silence. "If you want to waste your time drawing fantasy, do it at home. Don't bring that kind of victim obsession into my classroom." Zion stood frozen. His sketch, his soul on paper, lay in shreds on the floor. No one moved. The classroom, once his refuge, now felt colder than a courtroom. The humiliation burned so deep he couldn't feel his legs. Olivia's voice echoed in his mind. "Draw what they won't let you say." But now they wouldn't even let him draw. And then, something else happened. Something he didn't see. In the back corner of the classroom, a girl slowly lowered her phone. Ruby Simmons had always been quiet, the kind of student who didn't speak unless spoken to. Her blonde hair and pale skin made her invisible in a school that still grouped students by who they walked in with. But Ruby had been watching Zion's work for months. She didn't always understand his drawings, but she felt something when she looked at them, something electric and painful. When she saw Ms. Vale tear the drawing, something inside her snapped. She lifted her phone and snapped a photo, just before the paper ripped completely. It captured Zion's eyes, wide with disbelief, the image still half intact. A split second in time. She didn't know why she took it. Not yet. She just knew it needed to be seen. Zion knelt silently and gathered the torn pieces of Breathe without a word. Miss Vale turned her back, resuming her lecture on complementary colors, as if nothing had happened, as if erasing someone's truth was just another Tuesday lesson. The bell rang minutes later. Students shuffled out, avoiding Zion's eyes, scared their silence might say too much. He walked slowly, stuffing the ruined sketch into his bag, each step heavier than the last. He didn't notice Ruby watching him, didn't see her pull up a subreddit on her phone titled Student Artists Unfiltered, didn't see her hands trembling as she typed. Caption: My classmate drew this. Our teacher ripped it up, thought it deserved to be seen. She hit post, but someone else in the room saw the sketch before it was destroyed, and they took a photo. The night after Miss Vale tore Zion's drawing, the internet quietly caught fire. It began on a thread buried deep in a subreddit for young artists, a corner of the web where students shared sketches, critiques and quiet frustrations about the teachers who didn't understand them. Ruby Simmons uploaded the photo around 8:43 p.m., her heart racing as she clicked post. The image wasn't perfect, a bit grainy, slightly tilted, but it was powerful. It captured the exact moment. Breathe was being torn in half, Zion's face frozen between disbelief and grief. Her caption was simple. My classmate's drawing was destroyed for being too political. Thought people should see what was lost. She locked her phone and went to bed, thinking maybe 20-30 people would see it. Maybe they'd talk about how unfair it was. And that would be it. But the world had other plans. By sunrise, the post had more than 50,000 upvotes. By noon, it was everywhere. Re-uploaded on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and even Facebook groups run by art educators. People began adding captions like, "Let Black kids express their truth," and "Erased voices are still voices." The photo had become more than just an image. It was a symbol. At Langston Middle School, the day began like any other. Zion walked in quietly, keeping his eyes low, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the school walls. But something felt different. Hallway whispers followed him, strange glances from kids he'd never spoken to. Ruby caught his eye near her locker, guilt flickering behind her nervous smile. She wanted to tell him, to prepare him, but it was already too late. By third period, Zion's name was trending. Zion's sketch. Students huddled around phones, showing each other the post, whispering his name in awe and confusion. Some thought it was inspiring. Others just wanted to see the viral kid in person. Zion sat in his seat, headphones in, pretending not to notice, but the tension was suffocating. When the intercom crackled to life, "Zion Palmer, please report to the main office." The whole class went silent. He could feel everyone's eyes on him as he stood in the office. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and panic. Principal Daniels sat behind his desk, jaw tight, scrolling through something on his computer. Across from him sat Ms. Vale, immaculately dressed, expression neutral but her eyes sharp, like glass. "Zion," the principal began carefully, "there's been an incident online. Something about your artwork." Zion's stomach dropped. "Online?" Mrs. Vale leaned forward, her voice dripping with manufactured calm. "Zion, did you or your mother post that image?" He blinked. "What image?" Her tone hardened. "The photo of me in class. Someone uploaded a picture of your drawing being torn. It's gone viral." He shook his head quickly. "I didn't post anything." Principal Daniels rubbed his temples. "Regardless, this is serious. The district office has already called. There are reporters emailing us, news outlets, local blogs, even a New York art collective asking for comment." Zion just stared at the desk, his mind spinning. He hadn't even told his mom about what happened. He could still hear the rip of the paper in his head, the sound refusing to leave. Ms. Vale crossed her arms. The image was taken out of context. The drawing contained violent imagery, and as an educator, I had to make a call. What's happening online is harassment, not accountability. Her voice cracked slightly, as if she were the one wronged. Zion wanted to argue, to say that art was supposed to be uncomfortable, that his drawing was truth, not violence. But he said nothing. He was a child in a room full of adults, who decided what his silence meant. When he got home, Olivia was already waiting. The television blared the local news, the anchor's voice calm but urgent. A controversial incident at Langston Middle School has sparked outrage after a teacher allegedly destroyed a student's artwork depicting police brutality. Zion froze. His mother turned, eyes red, holding her phone. "Why didn't you tell me?" He hesitated. "I didn't know it was online." She exhaled. Pacing. "They're using your name, Zion. Do you understand how fast this can turn? Today they praise you. Tomorrow they'll drag you." He looked at the screen again, the image of himself replaying in every broadcast, the heartbreak in his eyes frozen in time. It didn't feel like him anymore. It felt like someone else's story wearing his face. Olivia switched off the TV and crouched beside him. "You did nothing wrong. But you have to let me handle this now." At the school, chaos erupted. Parents called demanding answers. Teachers whispered about liability and public relations. The superintendent's office ordered the district to investigate. And in the middle of it all, Miss Vale doubled down. She released a carefully worded statement to the media, claiming she had acted responsibly to prevent the display of violent and racially divisive material. It was the kind of statement that sounded professional but bled with quiet prejudice. Online, the divide deepened. Some defended Zion passionately, calling the act racist and dehumanizing. Others echoed Ms. Vale's defense. Teachers have to maintain safe classrooms, or art shouldn't promote hate. The conversation grew louder, messier, more dangerous. By evening, protesters stood outside Langston Middle, holding signs that read, "Let him draw," and "Art is truth." Cars honked in support. The school board's voicemail filled up within hours. Meanwhile, Zion sat on his bed, staring at the torn remains of Breathe taped back together. Olivia had found the pieces in his backpack and smoothed them out on the kitchen table. The lines didn't quite meet anymore. There was a gap right through the figure's chest, as if the man's heart had been ripped out. Zion touched the page gently, tracing the rough tear. "She said it wasn't art," he whispered. Olivia swallowed hard. "Then she doesn't know what art is." His phone buzzed. Hundreds of notifications, messages from strangers, other students, even a local activist group, asking to meet. It was overwhelming. The world suddenly cared about a boy it had ignored the day before. But Zion didn't feel proud. He felt exposed. Ruby messaged him that night. "I'm sorry, Zion. I didn't mean for it to blow up. I just couldn't let her erase you." He stared at her words for a long time before replying, "She already did." The next morning, the story hit national headlines. Networks ran side-by-side images. Ms. Vale's smiling school photo, beside Zion's artwork. Talking heads debated whether it was censorship, racism, or just a misunderstanding. The noise became impossible to ignore. Langston Middle School's principal received a directive from the district office before first bell: immediate administrative meeting, mandatory attendance for all teaching staff. Prepare for media inquiry. By midday, the superintendent had made it official. A district-wide press release, typed in sterile bureaucratic language. An emergency hearing will be held to review the conduct of Ms. Gretchen Vale and the incident involving student Zion Palmer's artwork. Zion saw the notice on a friend's phone between classes, the bold letters flashing like a headline in a nightmare. A hearing. Finally. But then his friend scrolled to the bottom, reading aloud quietly. "Only district officials and faculty will be present." Zion frowned. "Wait, what about me?" His friend hesitated, then met his eyes. "You're not on the list, man." Zion stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by chatter, laughter, and the echo of ringing lockers. The world had seen his pain, shared his art, debated his story. But when it came time to speak, they'd left him out of the room entirely. The school board schedules an emergency hearing, but Zion isn't invited. Olivia Palmer stood outside the administrative building, with her fists clenched at her sides, holding her breath as if that alone could steady the fury rising inside her. The glass doors before her reflected a tired, overworked black mother in a cheap denim jacket, but inside she knew she was fire. Her son had been humiliated, erased in public by a teacher who still had her job. Now the district was holding a hearing, and Zion wasn't even allowed in the room. She hadn't raised her son to be silent. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," the receptionist said for the third time, her voice too calm, too practiced. "This is a closed-door session. Staff and board members only. Olivia leaned in, voice low and dangerous. So my child gets publicly destroyed in a classroom. His art desecrated. And you're telling me I can't speak for him? The receptionist glanced nervously toward the hallway where murmurs and footsteps echoed behind a heavy wooden door. They'll release a statement after. That's all I can tell you. Olivia turned sharply and walked out. But not home. Not this time. She headed straight to the parking lot, where a growing crowd of students, parents and strangers were gathering, holding up signs that screamed through color and cardboard, "Let Zion speak. Silencing black art is racism. He drew our reality." A few wore t-shirts with the torn sketch printed across the front, the figure still crushed beneath a faceless knee. It had become a symbol now, a movement. Ruby Simmons stood quietly near the front, with her phone clenched in both hands. She hadn't spoken to Zion in 2 days. She didn't know if he was angry with her, overwhelmed or simply lost in it all. But she had something now, something she knew the world needed to hear. Back inside the building, Ms. Gretchen Vale sat straight-backed at a long polished table, her hands folded neatly in front of her like she was preparing for a piano recital. Her lawyer, an older man in a gray suit and expensive glasses, whispered something into her ear. She nodded once, then raised her chin slightly. Across from her, 5 board members sat in an uneven row, some pretending to review documents, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke until the superintendent cleared his throat. "Ms. Vale, we're here today to hear your version of the events that occurred in your classroom on October 3rd, he began. "We understand there's been considerable media attention," she interrupted smoothly. "Yes, and none of it reflects the full truth." Her voice was calm, too calm. "I have taught for over 20 years. I've mentored hundreds of students, many of them from disadvantaged backgrounds. But Zion Palmer's drawing was not simply art. It contained aggressive and politically charged imagery that was not appropriate for a middle school setting. As the educator in the room, I made a judgment call to protect the environment." One of the board members raised an eyebrow. "You tore it up in front of the class, correct?" "I removed it in the only way I could, given the disruptive nature of the piece," she replied. "Frankly, I believe Zion is a troubled child. He comes from a single-parent home, and I've noticed signs of emotional instability. I saw this drawing as a cry for help, not a display of talent." The room went quiet. No one challenged her. No one asked about the deeper meaning of the piece, or why a child might draw such pain. No one asked what it meant for a black boy's truth to be labeled too disruptive.
They didn't have to.
The narrative had already been swallowed whole. Outside, Olivia felt a fresh wave of nausea in her chest as she scrolled through Twitter on her phone, watching the live updates pour in. A reporter tweeted, "Sources say teacher claims student comes from a broken home." Another post read, "Vel paints herself as victim of cancel culture, says sketch promoted division." But then Ruby moved. She found a quiet spot away from the crowd and uploaded the file. It was a voice memo she'd recorded weeks ago, accidentally at first, during an art class critique. In the recording, Ms. Vale could be heard laughing lightly, followed by the words that would ignite the internet all over again. "Art from people like him doesn't belong in real galleries. It's just anger in pencil form." Ruby posted the audio with the caption, "You deserve to know what she really thinks." Within 20 minutes, it was trending. Local news picked it up, then black art collectives, then activists. By the time the hearing ended, people outside were holding phones above their heads, playing the audio through Bluetooth speakers on repeat. "People like him. People like him." The phrase echoed off the brick walls like a curse. Inside the hearing, a board member's assistant ran in with an urgent printout. He whispered something to the superintendent. The tone in the room changed like a shift in weather. Ms. Vale looked up, her calm cracking just slightly. "What's going on?" she asked, eyes darting. The board members began whispering among themselves. Her lawyer reached for his phone, then suddenly looked pale. The audio was playing on every screen in the country. No more pretending. Outside, Olivia saw the moment the doors opened. Staff members stepped out, whispering quickly into phones. Reporters crowded around, cameras flashing. She didn't wait for the official statement. She grabbed the megaphone from a protester and climbed onto the concrete planter near the entrance. "I wasn't allowed in that room," she began, voice shaking. "They called my son troubled, said he needed help. But they didn't see the nights he stayed up drawing because it was the only way he knew how to breathe. They didn't see how hard he fought just to be heard." The crowd went quiet, She continued. My son isn't broken. He's brave. And if the system can't see that, then maybe it's the system that needs help, not him. Applause broke out, loud and echoing. Across town, in a Harlem studio lined with bold black canvases and modern sculpture, Deshaun Mercer, curator, activist and art historian, sat behind his laptop staring at the viral clip. He didn't know Zion Palmer, but he knew what it meant to have your voice stolen by someone who saw your truth as a threat. He picked up his phone, typed in the email address listed under Zion's mother's name from a PTA directory that had been leaked online. The subject line read, "We need to talk about your son's work." A mysterious email arrived to Zion's mother, from a famous curator in New York. Olivia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone, rereading the email, like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. From Deshaun Mercer, senior curator, Harlem Contemporary Museum. Subject: Your son's art speaks. We want to listen. Message: I believe your son's piece belongs in our upcoming exhibit, Erased Voices. We're not just showcasing art, we're showcasing resistance. The email wasn't long, but every word hit like thunder. She glanced down the hall. Zion was in his room, pencil to paper again, though this time the sound of his sketching was hesitant, uncertain. She hadn't told him yet. After everything, part of her worried the offer would feel like salt in an open wound, like someone wanted to frame his pain while he was still bleeding. But when she finally called out his name, Zion came slowly, shoulders drawn tight. There's something you need to see, she said gently, turning her phone toward him. He read it once, then again. But his face didn't change. I don't get it, he whispered. Why would they want that? Because it's real, she replied. Because they saw what Ms. Vale tried to erase, and they think the world needs to see it too. Zion didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, the glow reflecting in his wide, tired eyes. Across the country in Harlem, Deshaun Mercer was already making calls. He'd spent 2 decades curating exhibitions on Black history, injustice, and resilience. But something about Breathe haunted him, not just the image but the way it had been discarded, destroyed, dismissed. It was a metaphor he'd seen too many times in too many forms. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. We need that piece. Contact whoever posted the original photo. I want a high-res digital restoration, framed, front of house. By morning, the Harlem Contemporary Museum's official social media account had made a public announcement. This spring, we're proud to feature a bold new exhibit, Erased Voices, centered on art that systems tried to silence. Zion Palmer's sketch will lead the collection. The post exploded, but Zion's emotions didn't match the celebration around him. He sat by the kitchen window, watching wind push dry leaves across the street. His hands lay flat on the table. No pencil, no sketchbook. Olivia had placed the torn remains of Breathe on the table again, this time surrounded by small lights she'd bought at the dollar store. It looked like a shrine. I didn't draw it to be famous, he said quietly. I didn't know what else to do. You drew truth, Olivia said, placing a hand on his, and the truth scared them. He looked up. But now they want to hang it on a wall? Like it's beautiful? It wasn't supposed to be beautiful. It's not. It's powerful. Zion's lips trembled. But I'm not. Zion, she said softly. You're more powerful than you know, and that's exactly why they tried to silence you. Meanwhile, Miss Vale watched the headlines from her couch, wineglass in hand, surrounded by press clippings, damage control drafts, and her brand new PR consultant, a sharp-tongued crisis specialist named Emily Creel. This is getting worse by the hour, Emily muttered, scrolling through her iPad. We need to get ahead of it, reframe the narrative. I already made a statement, Ms. Vale said bitterly. Emily rolled her eyes. And it made you sound like a bigot with a thesaurus. I was protecting my students, Ms. Vale insisted. It was a hostile image. Hostile to who? Emily snapped. You made a black child's pain look like a threat. That's not a good look. And Ms. Vale slammed her glass down. I'm being hunted for doing my job. No, Gretchen, Emily said slowly. You're being held accountable. There's a difference. Still, they moved forward with a new PR campaign. Ms. Vale filmed a video from her living room, carefully lit, seated in front of art books and a dusty violin she hadn't touched in years. I was a teacher for over 2 decades. I've dedicated my life to inspiring students, but one image taken out of context has painted me as something I'm not. I love all my students. I always have. But when art becomes divisive, we must ask, Are we educating, or are we indoctrinating? The video was posted. Within hours it was dissected line by line. Social media erupted. Commenters weren't fooled. They called it what it was: whitewashed gaslighting. Her tears were analyzed. Her language critiqued. And through it all, Zion's drawing was shared again and again, now digitally restored. The tear lines removed. The image whole. But symbols, like people, are fragile. 2 days later, as Zion walked to the mailbox, he noticed a plain white envelope stuck between bills. No return address, no stamp, just his name in shaky handwriting. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper, and on it, 5 words cut from magazines like a ransom note. Stop lying about that teacher. Zion's breath caught. He looked around the street, quiet, ordinary. Nothing seemed out of place, but his fingers trembled. The letter fell from his hands and fluttered to the porch floor. When Olivia found him minutes later, he hadn't moved. He just kept staring at the letter like it might disappear if he waited long enough. She scooped it up, read it, and her face went cold. "We're calling the police," she said immediately. Zion didn't argue, but his voice was soft when he asked, "Do you think she sent it?" "I don't know," Olivia said, "but someone wants to scare you into silence." He nodded slowly. "They're too late." An anonymous threat arrives at Zion's home, warning them to stop lying about that teacher. The envelope sat sealed in a police evidence bag on the kitchen table, but the fear it delivered still hung in the room like smoke. Zion watched as 2 uniformed officers stood near the fridge, one scribbling lazily in a notepad while the other half scrolled through his phone. "So there were no witnesses? No cameras outside the house?" the taller one asked without much interest. Olivia folded her arms. "We don't have a doorbell cam, but someone dropped that on my porch with my son's name on it. That's targeted intimidation." The officer shrugged. "Could be a dumb prank, ma'am. These kinds of things happen when emotions run high in the media. People get caught up." Zion sat silently at the table, hands clenched under his thighs. "Do you get a lot of pranks where someone cuts magazine letters and threatens a teenager?" Olivia snapped. "Look," the second officer said, finally glancing up, "we'll file a report, but unless another note shows up, or there's evidence of someone trespassing, there's not much we can do right now." And with that they left, 2 figures in blue walking out like nothing had happened. Zion stared at the door as it closed behind them, the thud echoing louder than it should have. Olivia picked up the evidence bag and stared through the plastic. "They're not going to protect you," she said quietly. "So we'll protect ourselves." But Zion didn't speak. He simply got up, walked down the hall, and shut his bedroom door behind him. That night, he didn't sleep. He drew, for hours, fingers moving furiously, like his pencil was the only thing keeping the panic out. When the sun cracked through the blinds, his floor was covered in pages, a new series. But this time, they weren't about police or street brutality. These were quieter horrors. One showed a black student raising his hand in a classroom, while a teacher pointed to the exit. Another depicted a hallway where white kids whispered in corners, faces morphing into wolves, while a black boy walked through the middle, carrying books like bricks. The third one, the most haunting, showed a school board meeting with 5 pale, faceless suits seated at a table, stamping "denied" over a drawing of a child's heart. He titled the series "Silent Schools." Olivia stood in the doorway, stunned. "These are..." She trailed off, unable to find the word. Zion looked up from the floor. "They're not art, they're warnings." Across the country, Deshaun Mercer received scans of the drawings through a Dropbox link. He opened them on his laptop one by one, lips parting in slow disbelief. "They're beyond ready," he murmured to himself. He called Olivia immediately. "I don't want just Breathe anymore," he said. "I want all of them. We'll open with Zion's solo exhibit next month. He'll headline the Harlem Contemporary." Olivia nearly dropped the phone. Zion stared at her, barely processing the words. "A whole exhibit?" he asked, blinking. "They're calling it Silent Schools," Olivia said. "Your work is the centerpiece." But with the attention came a flood of noise. News stations returned. Activists praised him. Critics questioned him. Internet trolls accused his mother of exploiting his trauma. Zion trended for days. And through it all, Ms. Vale simmered. She watched the headlines grow darker for her, each tweet a tiny pin in the image she'd tried to polish. Her new PR campaign wasn't working the way she'd hoped. Her statements were met with memes. Her tears on camera were clipped and mocked. So she did what she knew best. She played the victim louder. In a sit-down interview on national television, she painted herself as the casualty of cancel culture. Framed between soft lighting and childhood photos, she spoke in a carefully controlled tone. I spent my life educating children, trying to guide them. Now one drawing, taken out of context, has ruined everything. I've received death threats. I'm afraid to leave my home. Is this really what justice looks like? She paused, eyes welling up. I never hated that boy. I just wanted to help him. Public opinion fractured instantly. Some clung to her words, using them to argue for fairness and second chances. Others dug deeper, unearthing years of microaggressions buried in yearbooks, classroom reviews, and stories from former students who suddenly felt safe enough to speak. Meanwhile, the school board issued a brief but calculated statement. Miss Vale remains on paid administrative leave. The district is reviewing next steps. They wouldn't fire her. They wouldn't even condemn her. Zion saw the headline while sitting in a folding chair inside a student-run gallery at a nearby community center. It was the first time his new pieces were being shown publicly. Olivia stood beside him, her hand gently resting on his back, trying to ground him. Dozens of people packed the gallery. Students, parents, activists, local artists. The walls were lined with Zion's work, framed against black matting, each piece bearing his small handwritten captions. Whispers floated through the air. This is heavy. He's only 13. This feels like my son. It should have been a triumph. But Zion couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching him for the wrong reasons. He tried to look proud, but his chest was tight. The more people praised him, the more exposed he felt. His pain was hanging on walls, and no one knew what it cost him to make it. He excused himself and stepped outside for air. The night was cold, quiet, until the scream. It came from the back of the building. Zion and a few others rushed inside, pushing through the crowd gathering near the far wall of the gallery. Someone had defaced one of his drawings. A thick splash of red paint now covered Faceless Suit, dripping violently across the paper, obscuring the faces of the board members. On the floor, a small red can of spray paint rolled to a stop. Zion stared, chest heaving, throat dry. On the wall next to it, scrawled in black marker, "This isn't art, it's propaganda." Gasps filled the space. Phones came out. People shouted. Security fumbled with radios. Zion didn't move. He just kept staring at the red paint, so much like blood dripping down the paper, like the truth being drowned in hate, all over again. And in that moment, he realized something horrifying. They weren't just afraid of his art. They were angry at it. Zion's new artwork is vandalized at a student gallery. Red paint splattered across it. The red paint had barely dried before the news hit every major feed. Photos of Zion's vandalized piece swept across social media. Faceless Suit, now smeared in angry crimson, its haunting power warped into something violent. The words sprayed beside it, "This isn't art," were unmistakable. It wasn't criticism. It was a warning. Zion stood in the gallery long after the crowd thinned, eyes locked on the wall. Volunteers rushed to document the damage, clean the floor, preserve the frame, but he couldn't move. Not yet. Olivia placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We can take it down, baby," she said softly. "We don't need to leave it up like that." Zion shook his head. "No," he whispered. "Let them see what they did to it." But inside, something cracked. This wasn't just about a sketch anymore. This was about his existence being seen as a threat, his truth considered dangerous. Hours later, the gallery's director pulled Olivia aside. "I need to be honest with you," she said hesitantly. "Our surveillance system, we had a technical failure. Footage from the past 24 hours was erased." Olivia blinked. "You're telling me someone walked in here and defaced my son's work, and there's no video?" The woman nodded. "We're devastated. But it looks like it was wiped remotely. It is still looking into it." Zion overheard every word. They'd taken his voice. Again. Silenced the proof. Again. He didn't speak for 3 days. Not to his mother. Not to Mercer. Not even to Ruby, who texted every morning asking if he was okay. In his room, the walls stared back at him, once alive with sketches, now blank. He couldn't pick up a pencil. Every time he tried, his hand froze. The graphite lines turned into reminders of how easily his truth could be defaced, mocked, or erased. Olivia grew worried. She tried everything. Music, movies, cooking his favorite meals. Nothing pierced the silence. Then, a package arrived. It was from Mercer. Inside was a handwritten note and a plane ticket to New York. The note read, "The world won't stop trying to quiet you, Zion. But there are others who've been quieted too. I want you to meet them. Come to the retreat. Not as an artist, as a survivor." Zion stared at the ticket for a long time. That night he finally spoke. "Will you come with me?" he asked Olivia. She smiled. "Anywhere." A week later, they landed in New York. The air smelled different, fast, electric. But Zion felt small again, swallowed by a city that didn't know his name, didn't see the scars beneath his skin. The mentorship retreat was held in a converted Harlem warehouse turned art sanctuary. High ceilings, open canvases, and music drifting softly from old speakers. It wasn't fancy, it was honest. Mercer greeted them with warmth that felt like armor. "Zion," he said, "you don't have to prove anything here. Just listen. Just feel." Zion nodded, though doubt still lingered in his chest. Over the next few days he met other young artists, some just like him, others carrying different but equally heavy truths. There was Devante, who painted murals after his brother was killed in a mistaken identity stop and frisk. A girl named June, whose comic book about a queer black superhero was banned from her school. And Tamara, a soft-spoken 17-year-old, whose clay sculptures depicted classrooms in cages. She and Zion sat across from each other one afternoon, paint-stained hands clutching paper cups of apple juice. "I saw your work online," she said. "Breathe. It made me cry." Zion didn't know what to say. "They tried to destroy it." "They tried," she said firmly, "but they couldn't. That means your art's screaming, and the louder it screams, the more they'll want to shut you up." He looked down at his hands. Tamara leaned in. "If they're scared of what you create, that means it's dangerous to the right people." Something shifted in him then. Not all at once, but a flicker. That night, he picked up a pencil again. The image came in pieces: the red paint, the black lettering, the gallery wall, the blurred faces in the crowd. He drew the vandalism as it was: ugly, intrusive, dripping. But in the corner he added something new. A single raised fist holding a paintbrush. He titled it "Red Ink." Louder voice. The mentors wept when they saw it. By the end of the retreat, Zion had completed 3 more pieces, all born from pain, all pulsing with defiance. His voice, still trembling, had found its pitch again. But just as the light began returning, the shadow came back. Olivia received a knock on the door the day after they returned from New York. It was a courier, holding a thick envelope. She signed without a word, and opened it slowly. Her breath caught. Inside, a legal notice. Gretchen Vale was suing the Palmer family for defamation. The lawsuit accused Olivia and Zion of deliberately engaging in character destruction and manipulating public perception through false narratives and unauthorized recording. Zion watched her hands shake as she flipped through the pages. "She's trying to erase me again," he said barely above a whisper. Olivia looked up, her eyes blazing. "No. This time, we don't back down. Miss Vale sues the Palmer family for defamation." The legal envelope sat untouched on the kitchen counter for hours, as if its contents might change if Olivia waited long enough. But the silence only grew heavier with every minute. Zion stood across the room, watching her pace the floor like it might give her an answer. "She really filed it," Olivia said, finally, holding the papers like they were laced with poison. "Defamation. Deliberate reputation destruction." Zion didn't respond. He just clenched his jaw, holding back the shame he hadn't earned. The pages detailed everything Miss Vale and her legal team were accusing them of: public humiliation, emotional distress, career sabotage. They claimed the audio recording was doctored, the viral image staged. The lawsuit didn't just go after Olivia. It named Zion directly, claiming the malicious portrayal of Gretchen Vale was part of a coordinated effort to ruin her life. "They're calling it a character assassination," Olivia whispered, voice shaky. "As if she wasn't the one who tore your soul in half. And they couldn't afford a lawyer. Not the kind who knew how to fight white-collar wolves like this." Olivia made calls all night. Friends, old co-workers, even her cousin who once interned at a civil rights firm. She left voicemails, filled out forms, refreshed inboxes, and finally, an email pinged back. Subject: ACO legal inquiry. Urgent response. Message: "We have reviewed your case. We believe this is not just a personal lawsuit, but an attack on freedom of expression and systemic truth-telling. We would be honored to represent Zion Palmer." Olivia gasped. Zion sat up in his bed when he heard her voice. "They're in," she said, smiling through tears. The ACLU is taking our case. The news gave them air, but the fight was only beginning. Court proceedings were scheduled in a matter of weeks. Media attention surged once again. Cable news anchors returned to their panels. Is this justice or defamation? They asked, as if the erasure of black pain was a matter of opinion. On the first day of the trial, the courthouse steps were packed. Supporters chanted Zion's name. Protesters held signs of "Breathe." Red paint crossed through it, claiming it was all lies. The divide had never been wider. Zion, in his only pressed button-up shirt, walked beside his mother with shoulders square, jaw tight. The world was watching again. Inside the courtroom, the tension could have cracked glass. Miss Vale sat with her lawyer, Gregory Klein, a sharp-suited man with a history of winning defamation cases against journalists and whistleblowers. He spoke smoothly, like he was always delivering a closing argument. In his opening remarks, he painted a narrative that felt like fiction. Miss Vale, a decorated educator, targeted by an unstable student, and a bitter mother with an online mob behind them. The audio was edited. The image was sensationalized. And my client, who has given her life to education, has been unfairly crucified in the court of public opinion. Then, the ACLU attorney stood. A black woman named Dara Hammond, calm and surgical, as if she'd been waiting her whole career for this exact case. Let's not forget what happened here, Dara said, locking eyes with the jury. A teacher destroyed a black child's expression of truth, and now wants to punish that child for daring to exist loudly. Zion's heart pounded in his chest. The first few days were grueling. Miss Vale's legal team brought in expert witnesses to question the artistic value of Zion's drawing, implying it was inflammatory, not insightful. They painted Olivia as a woman pushing her son into the spotlight for money and attention. Every frame of Zion's face on a protest poster was twisted into evidence of a smear campaign. Then came Zion's turn to testify. He sat, knees bouncing under the table, fingers picking at his sleeves. Zion, Dara asked gently, "Can you tell us what happened that day in the art classroom?" He glanced toward Miss Vale. Her gaze was cold, unblinking, as if daring him to speak. He swallowed. "I showed her a drawing I made. It was called Breathe. I'd drawn it after seeing my cousin get arrested at a party. I was trying to make sense of it, draw the pain out. And what did she do? She looked at it and said it wasn't art. She said it was violent. Then she ripped it up in front of everyone." A long silence filled the courtroom. "And how did that make you feel?" Dara asked. Zion looked down at his lap. "Like I didn't belong in the world I was trying to draw." Dara's voice softened. "Zion, do you remember what she said to you after she destroyed your work?" He nodded slowly. She said, "Art from people like you doesn't belong in real galleries." Gasps broke out in the gallery, seating. The judge banged his gavel. Across the courtroom, Miss Vale leaned forward, whispering furiously to her lawyer. But the real shift came the next day, when Ruby Simmons took the stand. She wore a simple navy blazer, her hair pulled back, and clutched a stack of notebooks in her lap. Her voice was calm, but every word landed like thunder. "I recorded Miss Vale in class," she said plainly. "Not just once. I started because I noticed how differently she treated the black students. Not just Zion, all of them." She recounted moments of racially loaded grading. How Zion would get marked down for lack of structure, while white students with scribbles were praised for creative chaos. How students of color were rarely chosen for exhibitions. How Miss Vale once described a student's sketch of a protest as aggressive nonsense, while praising a white girl's drawing of riot police as orderly. "And why did you record her that day?" Dara asked. Ruby took a deep breath. "Because I knew no one would believe Zion if he stood up alone." The courtroom fell into an eerie stillness. Gregory Klein tried to challenge the credibility of the audio. Claimed editing. Claimed context. Claimed the words were misunderstood. But the damage was done. And then Dara dropped the final blow. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we would like to submit Exhibit C, a high-resolution digital restoration of Breathe, the drawing that started this case. The original was destroyed, but thanks to a photograph taken before its destruction, it has been faithfully restored. The defense claims this was propaganda. Let the court decide if it sees truth." Gasps again. Even the judge leaned forward. The projection lit up the courtroom wall. There it was, the image that had become a national flashpoint. A black man pressed to the pavement, a faceless officer. A crowd half watching, half recording. Zion's signature small in the bottom corner. Even through the courtroom's fluorescent haze, the room darkened with emotion. One juror wiped her eyes, another stared down at the table, hands clasped tight, and for the first time since the trial began, Ms. Vale looked nervous. The judge allows Zion's restored drawing to be entered into evidence. For a full 10 seconds, the courtroom didn't breathe. The image glowed from the projection screen at the front of the room, larger than life, yet so brutally human. Breathe, restored to its original power, dominated every inch of the wall. A black man's face, pressed against the pavement, the curve of a police officer's knee bearing down on his back. Around them, a crowd stood frozen. Some recorded with their phones, others turned away. One young boy in the corner, Zion's artistic self-insert, reached toward the man but never quite made contact. The silence was absolute. Not a cough, not a shift in a chair. Even the judge, who had been strict about keeping emotion out of the courtroom, leaned forward and took a long, deep breath. Zion sat still, his palms sweaty, fingers clenched around the armrest of his chair. It was the first time he'd seen breathe like this, magnified, untouched by red paint or hands that didn't believe in it, and though it felt like his ribs were tightening around his lungs, there was something sacred in watching the room react. One juror, a middle-aged white woman with a silver bun, wiped tears silently from beneath her glasses. Another juror, black, early 30s, sleeves rolled up over tattooed forearms, didn't look away for a second. His jaw locked tight. His eyes never blinked. Gregory Klein cleared his throat, attempting to cut through the fog of feeling. "Your Honor," he said, his voice sharp, "we object to the emotional manipulation of this courtroom. This drawing is not evidence of fact. It's incendiary propaganda. It was created after the event in question, and it unfairly biases the jury." Judge Franklin turned toward him. "You'll have time to cross-examine, but this drawing is relevant. Proceed." Dara Hammond, ever composed, stood slowly and walked toward the screen. She paused, allowing the room to absorb the piece 1 second longer before turning to the jury. "This is the drawing that was torn apart. This is what Ms. Vale called too political, too angry, too inappropriate," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "But I ask you, what about this image is inappropriate? Is it the pain? The silence? The truth?" She turned toward the bench. "We call our next witness, Mr. Deshaun Mercer." All eyes turned as Mercer stood from the audience and stepped forward. He was dressed in all black, tall and composed, carrying a presence that belonged more in galleries than courtrooms. Yet he made the room feel like both at once. After being sworn in, Dara approached. "Mr. Mercer, what is your profession?" "I'm a senior curator at the Harlem Contemporary Museum," he replied. "I specialize in black contemporary art and visual resistance pieces." "And you've seen this drawing before?" "I have," he said. "I requested it personally after the image went viral." "Why?" He looked directly at the jury. "Because it speaks. Because it's honest. Because it's what black art is meant to be. Disruptive, emotional, and deeply personal. We don't get the luxury of painting sunflowers and sailboats. We paint survival." Klein stood. "Objection. Commentary." "Sustained," the judge said mildly. "Stick to the drawing." Dara nodded. "What impact has this drawing had?" Mercer folded his hands. "We announced last week that Breathe will be the centerpiece of our upcoming national tour titled Voices We Tried to Erase. Zion Palmer will be the youngest artist in the history of our museum to lead a traveling exhibit, not because of the controversy, but because of the clarity. This image doesn't glorify violence. It exposes it." Klein didn't let the moment linger. During cross-examination, he stalked the witness stand like a predator testing fences. "Mr. Mercer, you called this drawing truth, but isn't it based on a fictional character? A made-up moment?" Mercer didn't flinch. "It's based on a lived reality, one shared by too many. But it didn't happen in that exact way, correct? No image ever captures exact truth. That's what art is for. So it's not evidence, it's perspective. It's testimony," Mercer said firmly. "Same as the stories people tell in courtrooms like this, every day." The courtroom shifted again. When Zion stepped out during recess, he wasn't ready for the crowd waiting outside. Activists, students, artists, dozens of them, many holding prints of Breathe against their chests like armor. Some wore shirts that read, "Art is evidence." Others simply chanted his name. Olivia wrapped an arm around him. "You okay?" Zion didn't answer right away. Then, I think, I finally am. But the world kept spinning. That night, while Zion was home sketching a new idea, a piece called Witness Box, his phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Zion Palmer? Yes.
This is Principal Langston. We received a report today, and sorry to tell you, but your school locker was broken into this afternoon. Your sketchbook is missing.
Zion sat up straight. My new sketchbook?
We believe so.
The custodian found your locker open. The latch was bent. It doesn't appear to be vandalism. It looks like someone pried it open and took only one item. Zion's stomach dropped. That book had everything. The new pieces from the retreat, personal pages, ideas, unfinished drawings that had never left his hands. We'll do a full investigation, the principal said. But there aren't any working hallway cameras on that floor. Maintenance was... Zion hung up. He stood there, phone in hand, chest pounding. It wasn't just a theft. It was a message. Again, someone was still trying to erase him. Zion gets a call. His sketchbook has been stolen from his school locker. Zion sat on the edge of his bed, holding the phone long after the call had ended. The quiet hum of nothing buzzed against his ear, like the ghost of a voice that never should have had to speak those words. Your sketchbook is gone. It didn't make sense. He'd placed it in his locker that morning, right after second period. The lock had clicked shut. He'd checked it. He was sure. Now it was gone. And not just any sketchbook. It held the pieces he hadn't shown anyone yet. The raw ones. The ones about guilt. About fear. About not being sure who he was anymore. Some pages were just shadows and shapes. Half-formed thoughts. Others were finished works. One titled Blurred Bell showed a black student in a hallway turning translucent as white kids passed him by. Another, Silence as Policy, sketched an empty school office with "We're investigating" stamped across the wall. They were vulnerable. They were personal. And now they were stolen. When Olivia walked into his room that night, Zion didn't look up. His hands were still, his shoulders too straight. I'll go to the school first thing in the morning, she said. Demand they check the cameras. There aren't any, he replied flatly. Maintenance was doing work on that floor. Olivia's mouth twitched. How convenient. But Zion didn't answer. The next day, Olivia stormed into the main office of Langston Middle, demanding answers. The assistant principal gave her a practiced smile, thin with condescension. We understand your concern, he said, but unfortunately there's no clear evidence of wrongdoing. Lockers aren't always secure. Sometimes students forget to latch them. I know my son, Olivia snapped. He didn't forget anything. We don't have any reason to believe this was a targeted incident. You've got every reason, she said, voice rising. His drawing was vandalized 2 weeks ago. He's been publicly attacked. He's receiving threats. I understand you're upset. No, you don't. But it was clear nothing would come of it. No report. No investigation. No consequences. Back at home, Zion spiraled. He barely ate. Barely slept. He sat for hours at his desk with blank paper in front of him, unmoving, the pencil trembling in his fingers like it didn't recognize his hand anymore. Ruby messaged him every day. At first, simple check-ins. You okay? Then longer ones. We're going to figure this out. I promise. But Zion rarely replied. When he did, it was short. Don't bother. But Ruby did bother. She rallied 2 friends, Maya and Arjun, from the school's arts collective. They spent 3 lunch periods in the library combing yearbooks and old files, trying to figure out if this had happened before. It had. In 2019, a black student named Darren Carver had submitted a controversial painting to the school's spring show, an abstract piece with blue and black spirals clashing across the canvas. It disappeared from the locked exhibition room 2 days before opening night. The school said it was misplaced. In 2021, another student, Samara James, had a poetry journal vanish from her locker after writing a piece titled "The Only Black Girl in the Cafeteria." No reports, no follow-ups, no headline, just silence. Ruby printed everything, brought it straight to Olivia's door in a manila folder. Olivia sat at the table flipping through the printouts, her lips pressed into a tight line. They've been disappearing black kids for years, she said bitterly. Not their bodies, just their voices. When Zion saw the folder, his expression didn't change. He just stared at it like it was evidence in a trial he'd already lost. I want to pull you out, Olivia said quietly one night. Just until this dies down. We can homeschool. You'll be safe. Zion shook his head immediately. No. You're not eating, you're not drawing. If I disappear now, she wins, he said. Olivia hesitated. Who? He looked up. All of them. She didn't argue after that, but the tension weighed like lead. Every day at school, Zion kept his head down, but the whispers followed him. Teachers glanced away too quickly. Students who once reposted his art online now avoided him in the hall. Then, one morning, something strange happened. A plain cardboard package showed up at the front office, addressed to Zion Palmer. Personal, no return address. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and string, was his sketchbook, but something was wrong. Zion knew it before he even flipped it open. The first few pages were intact, rough pencil outlines, unfinished sketches, his notes scrawled in the margins. But when he reached the middle of the book, a jagged rip stopped him cold. A page was missing, cleanly torn, as if done with care. And on the inside back cover, someone had written in thick black ink, "Not everything deserves to be seen." Zion's hands shook. Olivia rushed to his side when she saw his face. "What is it?" she asked, and he held up the book. When she saw the note, her mouth fell open. "They took something," Zion whispered. "Not the book, something inside it." "What was on that page?" she asked. He stared at the torn edge. "I don't know." A student anonymously mails Zion's sketchbook back, with one page ripped out. Zion sat at the kitchen table, with the sketchbook open in front of him, staring at the empty space where the missing page used to live. The tear wasn't messy. It was clean, deliberate. Whoever had done it had taken care not to damage the binding. They hadn't stolen the book in anger. They'd taken that one page on purpose. Olivia sat across from him, her hands folded, eyes fixed on the jagged paper edge. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Zion's shallow breathing. "What was on that page?" she asked finally. Zion's eyes flickered. I don't remember." "Try," she pressed gently. He hesitated. The memory came back in flashes, the heaviness in his chest, the night he drew it, the way he'd refused to show anyone afterward. He remembered how his hand had trembled as he'd shaded the background darker and darker until it swallowed the light. "It wasn't something I ever wanted to share," he said quietly. "I was angry, scared. I was dreaming about people looking at me the same way they looked at that man and breathed. But this time, it was me." Olivia's voice softened. "You drew yourself?" Zion nodded, hanging from a tree. The words fell heavy between them. Olivia's breath caught. Her hand instinctively reached across the table, gripping his wrist. "Zion." "It wasn't about dying," he interrupted, voice breaking. "It was about feeling like I already had, like the world did it for me. I didn't draw a body. I drew a shadow, just swinging, alone." His mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. For a long time, they sat there, mother and son, both realizing that pain could take shapes even art couldn't contain. That night, Olivia emailed Mercer. By the next morning he was on the phone. His tone was equal parts compassion and concern. "Zion," he said, "I know that missing page hurts. But listen to me, when they steal your work they're trying to steal your story. Don't let them end it. Recreate it. On your terms this time." "I can't," Zion said. "That drawing wasn't supposed to be seen. It was ugly." Mercer's voice was steady. "Truth is always ugly before it's healing. But if someone else has it, they're holding your fear hostage. You take it back by redrawing it." Zion hung up without replying. For the next few days, the house felt hollow. Olivia moved quietly, trying to hold herself together. Watching her son fade again was like seeing his color drain out one shade at a time. One night, while washing dishes, she caught sight of her old easel collecting dust in the corner of the living room. A remnant from a life she'd buried under bills and exhaustion. Something inside her stirred. She wiped her hands, pulled the easel closer to the window, and began to paint. At first, the brush felt foreign in her hand. The strokes were shaky, uneven, but soon the rhythm returned. Color blending into color, pain translating into movement. Zion emerged from his room halfway through the night to find her standing over a half-finished canvas. The image showed two silhouettes, one small, one grown, reaching for each other through a wall of red haze. He stared at it for a long time. "That's us," he said softly. Olivia didn't look away from the canvas. "It's what I see every time I look at you. Me trying to protect you. You trying to reach something I can't touch anymore." He stepped closer, running his hand along the bottom of the frame. "Can I add something?" She handed him a brush. Zion dipped it in black paint, then drew a thin, fragile line from the smaller silhouette's hand to the larger one, connecting them. When he stepped back, the image looked complete. They titled it Mother and Son. It was the first time they'd created something together. The next morning, Zion emailed Mercer the photo of the painting. Within hours, Mercer called back, his voice thick with emotion. "Olivia, Zion, this belongs in the exhibit. It's not just about pain anymore. It's legacy." Zion hesitated. "I don't want people to see me hanging anymore." "They won't," Mercer said. "They'll see you standing." For the first time in weeks, Zion smiled. But the relief didn't last. 3 days later, while scrolling through his phone before bed, Zion froze. A trending video was circulating, a local news segment featuring a sit-down interview with none other than Gretchen Vale. The thumbnail showed her smiling politely beside a reporter in her home, hands folded neatly over her lap. The headline read, "Exclusive. The teacher speaks. Gretchen Vale's life after the trial." Zion clicked on it. Ms. Vale's house looked sterile, staged white walls, bright lighting, shelves lined with art books and framed student work. The interviewer praised her for grace under pressure, for moving forward with dignity. She played her part perfectly, offering tearful words about redemption and healing. But Zion barely heard her. His eyes caught something in the background. On the wall behind Ms. Vale's shoulder, framed in gold and lit by a lamp, was a single sketch. His sketch, the missing page. Zion's entire body went cold. He grabbed the remote, pausing the screen. The lines were unmistakable. The same shadowed branches, the same hanging silhouette, the same trembling pencil texture that only he knew how to create. Olivia walked in as he froze the image on the TV. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. He just pointed. Her eyes followed his finger. Her lips parted. "Oh my God," she whispered. The missing page, his private nightmare, was hanging proudly on the wall of the woman who'd destroyed his art and tried to destroy him. Zion's hand shook as he whispered, "She kept it." The reporter on screen kept talking, oblivious to the crime staring right behind him. "Miss Vale says she's focusing on finding peace," the interviewer said. "Art, she tells us, remains central to her life." Zion's chest tightened. The camera panned slightly, catching a closer glimpse of the frame, his signature still faintly visible in the bottom corner. Olivia's voice cracked. "She stole your pain and hung it like a trophy." Zion turned to her, eyes burning. "She didn't destroy my art. She collected it." That missing page shows up framed in Miss Vale's home during a leaked video tour. The video spread like wildfire. At first it was just another local news segment, a soft focus puff piece meant to reintroduce Miss Gretchen Vale as a misunderstood educator, seeking peace after a turbulent public ordeal. But within hours, screenshots started surfacing on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit. Not because of what Ms. Vale said, but because of what she unintentionally revealed. There in the background, hanging just over her right shoulder, was the missing page from Zion Palmer's stolen sketchbook. The haunting image of a shadowy figure hanging from a tree, captured in pencil and silence, unmistakably Zion's. The internet didn't miss it. Users zoomed in, lightened the frame, enhanced the contrast. The signature in the bottom corner became crystal clear, ZP, just like every other piece he'd ever signed. The caption on the first viral tweet read simply, "That's not her art." Then another,
That's the missing page.
and another. She destroyed it in public but framed it in private. By morning, Zion's phone was buzzing non-stop. Everyone from journalists to art critics to TikTok creators was talking about the same thing. The silence around the missing page had shattered. But Zion didn't feel vindicated. He felt violated. "She kept it like a trophy," he whispered, pacing the living room, voice trembling. "She tore it up in front of everyone, told me it was dangerous, then hung it on her wall like it meant something to her." Olivia gripped her coffee mug like it might shatter. "She wanted to own your pain. That's what people like her do. If they can't erase it, they'll claim it." By the time Zion arrived at school that day, the administration was in full panic mode. A swarm of reporters had gathered outside Langston Middle, demanding statements. Protesters lined the sidewalks with signs reading, "Return what was stolen," and "You can't frame trauma." Principal Daniels called Zion and Olivia into his office that afternoon. "We don't condone Miss Vale's actions," he said stiffly, "but please understand, She's no longer an employee of this district. The interview was done at her private residence. She stole my son's work, Olivia snapped, and you let her walk out with her job intact. We've referred the matter to law enforcement, he said. There's a formal investigation now. But Zion didn't want apologies. He wanted accountability. That evening, police officers visited the Palmer home to take Zion's statement. A few hours later, they raided Ms. Vale's house under a warrant. The sketch was seized.
When photos of it, now placed in an evidence bag, hit the internet, the fury doubled. Not just because it had been stolen, but because of its condition. It wasn't damaged. It hadn't been folded or wrinkled.
It had been matted, framed, and spotlit, like a centerpiece. And in one chilling twist, the back of the frame contained a typed label. Untied, anonymous submission. They were going to pretend it wasn't mine, Zion muttered when the image surfaced. She was going to hang it in her house and erase me at the same time. Miss Vale released a statement that evening through her lawyer. The artwork in question was found on school premises. I had no knowledge of its origins, and framed it out of appreciation for its emotional impact. I never claimed authorship. The statement only added fuel to the fire. Memes exploded online, her face photoshopped in art museums, next to stolen masterpieces. Hashtags like "Neck Fram by Vale" and "Dat Ain't Yours" trended for days. Under mounting public pressure and a now open criminal investigation, Ms. Vale was placed on unpaid leave from all affiliated educational programs. Galleries that once listed her as a guest speaker removed her quietly from their rosters. But for Zion, none of that brought peace. Every time he looked at a blank sheet of paper, he saw the shadow of that page, that moment, that theft. It was Mercer who finally helped shift the weight. He called one morning, voice calm and measured, but with a hint of excitement behind it. "Zion," he said, "I know this is all overwhelming, but I have something I want to ask you." Zion paused. "What?" "The Harlem Museum Gala. It's 2 weeks from now. We're closing the Erased Voices exhibition with a keynote speaker. I want it to be you." Zion didn't respond right away. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people, reliving the pain, explaining the theft, it made his stomach churn. "I don't know what I'd even say," he whispered. "You already said it," Mercer replied. "You drew it. You survived it. Now let them hear it in your voice." Zion looked over at mother and son, now hanging in their living room. His mother's half of the canvas, warm, desperate, reaching across to his own side, dark and unfinished. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." Word of his scheduled appearance spread quickly. Major news outlets ran with the story. Teen artist whose work was stolen by teacher to speak at museum gala. Invitations sold out. Celebrities confirmed attendance. The gala became not just a celebration but a reckoning. On the night of the event, Zion stood in the green room in a black suit that felt too tight, staring at his reflection. Olivia adjusted his collar, eyes gleaming with pride and worry. "Whatever happens out there," she said, "remember, you were never supposed to survive their silence." "But you did." Zion nodded. A museum staffer knocked gently on the door. 5 minutes. They made their way down the hallway, past towering sculptures and framed canvases, the air buzzing with excitement. But as they approached the entrance to the gala hall, a museum coordinator rushed toward them, breathless. "There's a situation outside," she said. "Protesters." Olivia's shoulders tensed. "Protesting what?" The woman hesitated. "Some activists are calling the exhibit Black Trauma Exploitation. They say Zion's work is being commodified, that the museum is profiting from his pain." Zion froze.
"They're blocking the entrance," the woman continued, chanting.
"Some are even holding signs with your face crossed out." Zion's chest tightened. He looked to Olivia. "They think I'm part of the problem now?" he asked. "You're not," she said. "You're the truth." But truth, he was learning, was never easy. On the night of the gala, protesters stormed the museum, calling it Black Trauma Exploitation. The Grand Hall of the Harlem Contemporary Museum glittered with soft lights and muted conversations as guests moved between glasses of champagne and the latest exhibit pieces. The walls behind the stage bore the bold title of the collection, Erased Voices. At the center, under a gentle spotlight, hung Zion Palmer's original sketch, Breathe. Its huge restored image dominated the room. Inside there was admiration. Patrons whispered about its raw power. A white-haired benefactor nodded slowly and said, "This is exactly the kind of art the museum needs." A young black curator gripped Zion's shoulder. You changed the conversation. Yet behind the praise, the world outside was already shifting. Zion's mother, Olivia Palmer, stood near the back, dressed in deep navy. She watched her son as he stepped up to the microphone. His heart hammered, but his voice stayed steady. I want to thank the museum, my mother, all the artists who refused to stay silent. But turning pain into profit without change is still silence, with a check. My drawing broke in a classroom. My voice got stolen. They hung it, framed it, made it pretty, forgot what it meant. If you look not at the frame but at what stands inside it, you'll see a boy who drew because the world left no other way. Use that. Don't hang it, move it. Don't just look, act. The audience held its breath. For once the lights were not warm, they were white, unforgiving. Zion's words spread across the room, into live streams, trending clips. Boy artist demands action, not applause. Global accounts picked it up. The phrase "move it, don't just look" flickered on screens around the world. But outside the museum doors, a different scene played out. A group of protesters stood in the street, placards high. Black pain is not profit. Stop commodifying trauma. When will we see justice, not exhibitions? Their voices echoed off stone walls, carrying the tension of a generation demanding more than acknowledgement. Inside, reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras switched focus between the stage and the crowd outside. Some guests looked embarrassed, checking their iPhones. Others stood firm, applauding Zion's message, nodding like they'd been waiting for it. The tagline for the night changed mid-event from celebration to challenge. Meanwhile, across town, Gretchen Vale sat in a studio under bright lights, wearing the mantle of victim. She launched a fundraising campaign, via GoFundMe, titled "Support Educators Under Fire." In a televised interview on a conservative talk show, she said, "I was the scapegoat. In an age of cancel culture, we're losing trust in our institutions. I love my students. I loved Zion, never hated him." This story spiraled out of control. Clips of her interview circulated fast. Some showed sympathy, others anger. "Teacher loses job for protecting students," ran a headline. Others read, "Privileged educator plays victim in racial narrative." The polarization deepened. Back at the gala, Zion wrapped up and stepped off stage. The applause was long, but he didn't stay for drinks. He slipped behind a wall and found Olivia waiting. "Did you see them out there?" he asked. "They're calling our story." He struggled for words. "They're calling it exploitation now." Olivia placed her hand on his shoulder. "You told your truth. They changed the script. But we can't let them rewrite you." He nodded, but the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. The same art that had been stolen, framed, praised, now felt delicate, like a line drawn in sand. "What if they're right?" he whispered. "What if I'm just the pain they want to sell?" But a twist emerged when a freelance journalist shared a leak online. An internal museum memo showing budget projections for the exhibit, including ticketed VIP talks featuring Zion's name. The combined #momentum of Zion's speech and the museum's fundraiser announcement made the exhibit a banner for both social justice and commerce. Comments flooded. "Great art, shame the institution profits. Is Zion credited or just marketed?" Olivia found herself torn. She'd believed in the museum's mission, but Morton's memo unsettled her. She pulled Zion aside later and showed him the screenshot. Projected revenue $2.3 million. Honorarium for artist. Estimated global reach $50 million. Zion stared at the figures. "They want us for the numbers," he said softly. "Not our story." The gala ended with people lingering in the lobby, sipping wine, debating. Protesters marched away, with chants still echoing. Zion and Olivia left quietly, passing the glowing facade of the museum, lights reflecting on her tears. On the ride home, Zion stared out the tinted window. He asked, "What's legacy if it's wrapped in transactions?" Olivia held the painting mother and son in her lap. Its canvas folded slightly from travel. "It's still ours. They can sell the frames, the tickets, but we own the truth inside." As they pulled into the driveway, Zion's phone buzzed one final time. A news alert reading, "Journalist uncovers hidden classroom journal of Ms. Val. Racial slurs, documented." Olivia and Zion froze. A hidden journal from Miss Vale's classroom surfaces, with racial slurs and notes mocking students. The janitor who discovered it might never have known the scale of what she held. Late one Friday afternoon, She was clearing out a storage closet in the old wing of Langston Middle School. Cabinets of stale art supplies, broken easels, and Ms. Gretchen Vale's discarded classroom materials. Between a stack of outdated brochures and a dusty tub of tempera paint, she found a weathered leather-bound journal. The cover bore initials G. Inside, the pages were filled with Ms. Vale's thoughts, scrawled in neat cursive, then spiraling into rushed, messy handwriting. What began as reflections on lesson plans and student engagement devolved into a showcase of prejudice, mockery of black students' names, derision of their drawings, sneers at their clothing styles, contempt for their families. One entry labeled a student a chaos of cotton and cans, referring to her outfit. Another dismissed a black boy's charcoal portrait as angsty scribble from a broken home. The journal was a private archive of bias disguised as teaching notes. When the janitor handed the journal to the assistant principal, the silence in his office felt heavy enough to echo. He flipped through page after page, reading aloud in disbelief. The teacher's supposed impartiality revealed as a facade of contempt. The administration's earlier statements of Ms. Vale being a dedicated educator, unfairly maligned, crumbled as the words hung in the air like verdicts. The assistant principal's face went pale, his tie askew, as he realized the school board could no longer defend her. News broke swiftly. The journal was leaked to local media. Headlines read, "Educators' private notes confirm racial bias. Journal of hate, teacher's secret archive exposed." Students who had once sat in her classroom read the entries aloud in their homes. Parents confronted the school during pickup lines. The board issued a public statement. Ms. Vale was placed on immediate suspension pending investigation and a termination hearing. For Zion Palmer, the moment felt surreal. On one hand, the vindication he had been inching toward. On the other, the damage done. His art torn, his voice dismissed, the missing page that had haunted him. He sat across from his mother at their kitchen table the night the headlines broke. Pieces of the journal were printed and taped to the tablecloth like evidence. Olivia's hand shook as she traced one entry aloud. "These kids don't understand structure. They're too busy being victims." She closed her eyes. "He lived that," she whispered. "And you drew it." Zion stared into his coffee, stirring it slowly. A meeting was arranged the next day with the school district's legal counsel and the board. Ms. Vale's attorney argued fiercely, claiming invasion of privacy, misinterpretation of notes taken in an educational context, and gross overreach by the school administration. But the journal's tone and specificity left no room for ambiguity. The board voted unanimously to terminate her employment with immediate effect. The defamation lawsuit she had filed against the Palmers was quickly dropped. Word filtered through the legal corridors that the district's DA was reviewing the case for potential hate crime charges, because the journal revealed the victimization of black students not as isolated incidents, but as part of a pattern of conduct. Zion returned to Langston Middle, and not as the student who had been silenced. He walked through the front doors flanked by the school's art teacher and the newly appointed diversity equity coordinator. Instead of his backpack, he carried a portfolio. He stood at the front of the auditorium, facing rows of students he once sat beside, and teachers who had sat beside Ms. Vale. The microphone felt cold beneath his palm. He began. "I'm not the boy whose drawing was torn. I'm the student whose truth was denied. And if you ever tell a child their voice isn't art, you're telling them they don't belong." The room fell still. The weight of every word seemed to hang on the ceiling. Some teachers shifted in their seats. Students leaned forward. He spoke of erasure, of context, of what happens when you label a child's pain as inappropriate. He spoke of healing, of drawing anyway. At the end, he revealed Mother and Son, and the series he had made after returning from New York, urging them to look beyond the gallery walls and into the stories behind them. Applause followed. It wasn't thunderous, something gentler, like acknowledgement, but it mattered. As he stepped off stage, Olivia hugged him, proud and exhausted. Back at home, Zion's mailbox held an envelope with a university crest. Inside, an official offer, a full scholarship to an elite art academy in Paris, one of the most prestigious for young contemporary artists in the world. The letter called him a visionary voice, whose work speaks across cultures and continents. Zion read it, stared at his reflection in the window, pulled his lips into a trembling smile. Then he looked at the torn page of his book still taped to the wall. He realized the fight wasn't over. It was just changing continents. Zion is offered a full scholarship to an elite art academy in Paris. Zion stood outside the gallery doors, staring up at the banner stretched across the entrance in thick, bold type. Erased, then remembered. The Art of Zion Palmer. Beneath it, a quiet crowd had already begun to gather. Reporters, curators, students, and strangers who had once only known him as a headline. Now they had come to see the story in its truest form, told not through articles or court transcripts, but through charcoal, ink, and truth. Inside the Smithsonian's Voices of Change wing, his exhibit spanned 3 rooms. The first wall displayed Breathe, carefully mounted with a restored original scan alongside the photograph Ruby had taken. The exact moment Miss Val's hand tore through the drawing, frozen forever in digital eternity. Beneath the framed image was a small silver plaque. This drawing was torn apart in front of a class. It now hangs in the Smithsonian. Zion hadn't written the line. The museum had, but it didn't need editing. Olivia walked quietly beside him, her heels soft against the marble floors. She wore a deep green dress and held her purse tightly under one arm, but her other hand never left Zion's elbow. "You ready?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. Zion nodded, but his stomach flipped, not from fear, from gravity. He'd spent years wondering if the world would ever see him. Now, the world was staring. As the doors opened, the lights dimmed slightly. The first wave of attendees filtered in. Some approached his work in silence. Others murmured beneath their breath, reading every title and caption carefully. Zion stayed near the back, blending into the corners, watching his drawings take on new lives in the eyes of others. The second gallery room featured his Silent Schools series, each piece now framed with white matting and individual QR codes that led to his handwritten artist's notes. Each drawing stood on its own, bold, aching, unapologetic, but together they told a story no classroom curriculum had ever dared to include. Toward the end of the line, a familiar voice stopped him. "You did it, Z." He turned. Ruby stood near the edge of the crowd, her blonde hair cropped short, a camera slung around her shoulder. She wore a press badge, but her eyes were soft, proud. "You really did it," she said again. Zion smiled. "I never said thank you, for that photo, for everything." "You don't have to," she replied. "You turned it into more than any of us ever could have imagined." They moved together toward the final room, where mother and son hung on a wall all its own. The joint painting had been transferred to canvas under Mercer's careful guidance, each brushstroke preserved, each line magnified. Visitors lingered longest here, whispering about its texture, its intimacy. A young girl, maybe 10 or 11, stared at it wide-eyed. She turned to her father and asked, "Did a mom and son really paint that together?" Her father nodded. "Yes, baby. They painted it when the world tried to unpaint them." Zion turned away, heart full, eyes stinging. Later that evening, during his speech to donors and patrons, Zion stood at the podium, not with a script, but with a single sentence written on his palm. "I want to thank the people who tried to erase me," he began, "because their hands never knew what mine could build." The room held its breath. "My mother taught me that survival is art, and art is survival. This exhibit isn't about fame. It's about the children whose names you've never learned. The ones who drew on napkins, on the back of test papers, in the margins of silence. Don't just look at what I made. Ask yourself what you missed when someone like me wasn't allowed to draw." Applause. Not polite, but thunderous. By the end of the night, Olivia found a quiet bench just outside the wing. She watched people exit with programs clutched tightly, eyes full of something she recognized, reverence. She wiped a tear and whispered, "He wasn't just remembered, he redefined." Back home, the noise began to fade. Mrs. Vale, once a name splattered across networks and comment sections, disappeared from public life. Her house had been quietly vandalized in the weeks after the journal leak spray paint reading, "Eraser" across her garage. Neighborhood whispers followed. Property value fell. Her GoFundMe had been flagged and removed after evidence of fund misuse surfaced. Now she lived in near isolation. Her name was no longer trending. But Zion wasn't tracking her. He had bigger dreams now. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. It came from a small town in Mississippi, postmarked with a stamp faded from humidity. The handwriting was large and childlike. Inside was a folded drawing, simple crayon-based, but heartbreaking in its own way. It showed a black boy sitting alone at a school desk, his drawing crumpled at his feet. Above him, in stick figure form, a teacher loomed, arm outstretched in mid-motion. There was no caption on the drawing, but there was a letter, short and scrawled in pencil. Dear Zion, my name is Isaiah. I'm 11. My teacher said my drawing was too angry and threw it away. My big cousin showed me your speech on TikTok. He said you made it to the museum. I didn't think we could do that. I just wanted you to know someone like me is still drawing. Isaiah Green. Zion read the letter 3 times, heart pounding louder with each pass. He folded it gently, placed it on his desk, and reached for a clean sheet of paper. Zion receives a letter from a boy in Mississippi, who also had his drawing thrown away. The morning Isaiah Green's letter arrived, Zion Palmer didn't know the world was still watching. His exhibition had wrapped its opening leg at the Smithsonian and was headed to Chicago next, then London. The news cycles had moved on, the protest chants had faded, and Zion, now 17, was spending his days sketching quietly in his Harlem studio apartment, an artist with the world's attention, and yet still searching for the next truth to draw. But that single envelope, from a town he'd never heard of, pulled him back to the beginning. He read the childlike handwriting again, slower this time, tracing each sentence like a prayer. My teacher said my drawing was too angry, and threw it away. My big cousin showed me your speech on TikTok. He said you made it to the museum. I didn't think we could do that. Zion closed his eyes. He could almost see Isaiah, small, hurt, still holding the memory of his own crumpled work, his own tiny rebellion lost to adult hands that didn't understand. He remembered what that felt like. He remembered exactly what that felt like. He folded the letter carefully, placing it beside his sketchbook. Then he picked up his phone and began typing. Subject: an invitation to keep drawing. To Isaiah Green. Hey Isaiah, my name is Zion. I read your letter, and I want you to know something. You are not alone. I used to think I was, but you reminded me that the fight to draw truth is still happening, even in classrooms where no one's looking. If it's okay with your family, I'd love to invite you to New York. I want you to walk through the gallery where your story is already waiting. They may try to silence us, but we draw louder now. Zion. The reply came within 48 hours, written by Isaiah's older cousin Monique, who worked nights at a factory and had helped Isaiah mail the letter in the first place. She wrote with cautious gratitude, saying they'd never been to New York but she'd make it happen. Zion offered to cover the tickets. 2 weeks later, Isaiah stood just outside the doors of the Harlem Contemporary, his shoes barely touching the edge of the red carpet. He was small for 11, with wide brown eyes, and his fists jammed deep into the pockets of his oversized hoodie. His cousin stood behind him, whispering, "Go on, baby." Zion met them at the entrance. Isaiah's mouth opened, but no words came. Zion knelt so they were eye level. "You made it," he said. Isaiah nodded, eyes still huge. "Is it really yours?" Zion smiled. "It's ours now." Inside the gallery, Isaiah moved slowly, like each step was sacred. He paused in front of Breathe, staring at it longer than any visitor that day. Zion stood beside him, watching quietly. After several minutes, Isaiah spoke. "This the one they ripped up?" Zion nodded. Isaiah whispered, "Looks like it's still breathing." The boy's words struck deeper than anything Zion had heard in months. They moved together through the exhibition. Silent schools, red ink, louder voice, mother and son. Isaiah asked questions about techniques, materials, even the smudges in the corners. And then they reached a new piece. One Zion hadn't unveiled to the press yet. It was a large 2-paneled work. On the left, a sketch of a black child with torn paper at his feet, red crayon still clutched in his hand. On the right, the same child, older, standing in a gallery, surrounded by shadows of teachers, critics, and ghosts of judgment. All looking on, silenced. Isaiah stared. "That's me." Zion nodded. "That's us." And then, in the quiet, Zion knelt again, this time beside the boy who reminded him of who he once was, and whispered, "They tried to erase us. But we draw louder now." Has anyone ever silenced your truth, just because they didn't want to hear it? If yes, then this story isn't just about Zion. It's about you too. If you believe stories like this shouldn't be erased, share it forward. And tell me, if you were in Zion's place, would you have stood back up?